I'm going to share with you the neuroscience of why sticking to a habit or a budget is so hard if you're somebody who lives in survival mode. So, I have a degree in neuroscience and I love understanding the brain science behind this because what often happens with people is that we have trained survival mode into the way that we behave. Like, it's so ingrained in us that, like, safety and security actually feels like a threat and actually feels boring to us. So, let me explain what I mean by this. So we have something called the salience network in the brain, and if something is salient, it means the brain decides it's worth paying attention to, and that there's like so many layers of what the brain decides is worth paying attention to. Something that obviously is found to be a threat, something that is like socially relevant, something that's emotionally relevant, things that are new, things that are rewarding, things of that nature. That's what the brain will pay attention to. And depending on what it is that the brain is paying attention to, will decide if the salience network is operating in one of two modes, bottom up or top down. Your bottom up salience network is very much a threat detection mode, and it's driven primarily by a part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is, for the sake of this video, the fear center of our brain. It asks the question, is this going to kill me? Now, let's talk about the sticking to the budget, sticking to the habit part. What happens when we're in a chronic state of survival mode is that likely our environment has been unpredictable because our brain is a prediction making machine. It wants to be able to predict what's going to happen. And if our environment is largely unpredictable or largely threatening, the amygdala is going to become hyperactive. And in scientific terms, it just means that our brain, like, we have like parts of our brain, right? But really, our brain is just like a clump of cells. Like, it's all cells. Like, this is just cells that's covered in like some kind of brain mass substance. And then there's like clusters of clumps of cells that behave in a certain way, and we call those brain parts. The amygdala is just like a cluster of clump of cells that function similarly. And what happens is that part of the brain gets bigger. So those cells, there become more of those cells, and those cells become bigger and they become more easily activated. Everything in the brain is a chain reaction of cells going off. And when the amygdala becomes bigger, it becomes easier for the amygdala to fire and respond. And so, like, in normal situations where the amygdala normally would not need to be involved, it just gets involved. It's like, oh, we're going to step in here because this might be a threat, because it's used to detecting threat. It's gotten so good at detecting threat that it will mistake a stick for a snake. You know what I mean? Like, you'll think like something's happening that's a threat that's not. And so, ironically enough, when things become stable and consistent and predictable, the brain's like, there must be a threat here. There must be, when there's not. And so this is why it becomes really hard to stick to a routine or especially a budget, because boring, mundane tasks are like, we insert a threat into the situation, it derails us, it takes us off track, and it makes it very hard to stick to things. And so one of the ways that I've been able to, because I've lived in poverty, lived off $10 an hour, broke out of very tough situations. One of the ways that I've been able to get myself to stick to habits is I had to infuse as much novelty into the process as possible. So, for example, let's say doing my budget. I do my budget the same way every Friday. Like, every Friday I do it. But the way I infuse novelty is I always like eat a bougie meal with it, like a sushi box, or like maybe I'll get like some Indian food or something. I always like get a meal, or where I do my budget changes, like the physical location of my budget changes. And so I infuse novelty into the process because the brain is always detecting, like, is something going to happen? Is what's going on? And like part of that is like kind of like novelty, like newness. And so you can kind of trick the brain into being like, see, we have detected a threat here. Like, there is something going on that's worth paying attention to. And so if you're somebody who has a really hard time sticking to a habit, keep the habit the same, right? But infuse as much novelty into it as possible. Like, for example, like I eat two of the same meals every single morning, either eggs, veggies, and protein, or yogurt, granola, and berries. I change the kind of granola that I eat in the yogurt, though, or I change the kind of fruit that I eat in the yogurt. Or like with the breakfast, the type of meat I eat with the breakfast changes. The vegetable that I eat changes. It's the same, though. That's how I've been able to speak my brain's language as somebody who was chronically stuck in survival mode, to actually stick to habits in a way that, like, kind of relaxes the threat detection mode part of my brain.